Well, thank you again for allowing me to be a part of this wonderful event. And thank you to everyone who's joining us today. So, my name is Angeliki Patsiavou, and today I'm here to share with you a lot of cool things, 10 in specific, that you should know before building in Copilot Studio. So these are field experiences based on a lot of different projects and a lot of different kind of experiences overall. So before we start, I wanted to share a little bit about myself. And before I even do that, actually, I wanted to thank the conference for creating these really fun AI videos. I think I was reimagined as a ancient Greek goddess in like
Yes.
Athens, which I loved it. So in honor of that, I put a screenshot of that. So that was awesome. Thank you for honoring my heritage and just making it a fun experience. So with that in mind, a bit about myself. I'm a business applications MVP from the UK, as well as a speaker and a technical blogger. At this point, I've been in CRM, which has been my whole professional career in some shape or form for over a decade, so 12 years to be exact. How time flies. And I've already had 3 different careers in it. That's how much I like CRM. So I started as a marketing and commercial strategy manager, then so pretty much an end user of all sorts of CRM platforms. Then I went into change management because I really believed in adoption as well as the proper implementation of CRM systems. But eventually, the nerd in me won, and I ended up going into a technical career path and became a functional architect. So, overall, a very hybrid professional, and particularly in the space of Dynamics 365. Originally, I'm from Greece and Italy, hence the video, but I've been living in the UK for over a decade now, so it's been my home. And outside of being a full-time tech geek, I also love martial arts and singing. I have some QR codes for you here about my blog, empoweredhumans.net. You'll actually see a few QR codes throughout the presentation because everything that I'll share with you mostly has a blog. So you can follow along through the blog as well in your own time and see a lot more detail about what we're going to cover today. Also, I'd love to connect with you. So please reach out to LinkedIn if you have any questions or you just want to say hi. And then a small shout out to the agent community, which is a Microsoft community that has been created to bring a lot of us agent building creators together. So with that in mind, let's get started. So why are we even talking about this? I love using numbers actually because I think they do speak volumes and louder than words. So a bit of research from Gartner, they estimated that by 2028, so only a couple of years from now, about 33% of all enterprise software solutions will include some version of agentic AI. Now that's a big number, but to put it in context, it was less than 1% in 2024. And it's only 2 years ago, right? So in the space of 4 years, they're estimating this massive exponential increase. And this is why talking about things like Copilot Studio building agents is always so relevant, not just in terms of talking, but also building the right strategy, building the right solutions. And I do believe that 2026 is a very defining year. We are seeing some very interesting trends. And I'd like to give a shout out to a fantastic thought leader called Ali Miller. You may be following her on LinkedIn or through her various activities. So she is quite an influential voice in the space of AI. She used to be with Amazon, for example, and IBM, but actually she is an insanely valuable thought leader in this space. And she created a very interesting map for what she believes are the core themes in the space of AI for this year. Now, that's a big slide. I don't want you to worry about reading through it, but I do want us to focus on a few patterns. So the first one is context and memory. Now, this is really important because we want the agents that we're building to really understand users even further. So creating things like memory, and of course, this is a shout out to our friends on the Foundry side, is very important because we are able to enhance those experiences for ourselves and our users, and it really scales up the user experience. Then the next theme that I really value is seeing how the agents that we're building are actually seen more not just as delegated kind of, let's say, junior resources, but true teammates that can not only help us, but also really support the next best steps that we should take and to really tell us what's, those proactive strategies essentially. And on top of that, I think it's time that we really, really hone into our multi-agent architecture because not just because it's like an awesome pattern to invest in, but because this is actually going to really promote the how lightweight your architectures are. So instead of thinking about building similar to back in the day when we're building monolithic solutions, to really decentralize some of your solutions so they're more lightweight, more easily manageable and configurable. And this is the same with multi-agent architecture. So there's a lot of value in it. And of course, in terms of our professional development, it's super, super important that we move beyond our comfort zone, learn new skills, because I do believe that 2026 will be a defining year when it comes to like the superficial users that have invested a little bit in certain areas versus those that find their niche and become super users in it. Not necessarily because we're all going to learn everything in one go, but because we will find our niche and really develop in it. So, with that in mind, I want us to start with the first lesson, which is the path of deterministic versus generative orchestration, or you may know it as classic orchestration. Now, this is actually, it starts with a simple enough setting in Copilot Studio when you're working on your agent, but it's actually a deeper choice than that. So, when we talk, for example, about deterministic or classic orchestration, a few components come to mind. Topics, for example, trigger phrases. So setting up specific messages that the user will say, and then the agent triggers an action based on that. And this is generally part of very structured conversations. So these are some of the key features we see when we talk about classic orchestration. And this is very much what we used to know when we built traditional kind of Power Virtual Agent style chatbots. Now, in the generative world, we are looking at scenarios and areas of enterprise knowledge, so vast knowledge, mixture of structured and unstructured data. And of course, the opportunity for users to have flexible user language. Instead of saying, these are the trigger phrases, these are the specific messages actually that the agent will respond to, we want to keep it flexible because we can't really dictate how people express themselves. Just in the mindset of like today, we have a very international conference. Everyone expresses themselves in different ways, either in their own language or even in English. So flexibility is key. However, we do also have to bear in mind that some scenarios are more adjacent to one of the two orchestration types. For example, let's say you had a very specific compliance scenario that you had to execute. Actually, in that case, a deterministic orchestration makes sense because you have to follow a very structured conversation and hit very specific milestones. So, in that sense, of course, it makes sense. However, if we shifted it to a very different scenario, for example, where we had a vast array of enterprise level FAQs that were completely unstructured and we just want to make sense through it, then absolutely generative orchestration would make sense because again, users may inquire about the same topic in different ways, and it really gives us the flexibility to scour through that knowledge and through the use of generative AI, structure an answer that makes sense regardless of how the user approaches it. So I thought after this brief overview, it made sense to do a quick knowledge check-in. So let's see if we can follow along. For example, if you had a reset password scenario, very classic, right? All enterprises, all services, they have to provide it. What is the best way? Well, in that sense, a topic made sense because it's a very structured conversation. It's a very specific process that you need to follow where you get the link, you reset, and then happy days, it's been successful. But what if you had the case of explaining corporate travel policy? I don't know about you, but I always get tripped up when it comes to specific details. And of course, every company has their own travel policy, what's included, what's excluded. So, in that sense, using, like we said earlier, generative answers makes a lot more sense because usually that information lies in a lot of different documents that need to be cross checked, corroborated, see what's the latest update. So, it really helps if we use the power of generative AI there. And of course, when you're looking at travel policy, you're probably going to go on a work trip soon and you have to submit an expense for it. So, how do you do that? In that case, a lovely tool or a lovely set of tools, depending on how you approach it, is either the traditional Power Automate cloud flows, or because now we're in the world of agents, there's also agent flows, which we can use within the um, actions and tools of the agent. And this is great because we now have even more flexibility in terms of the tools. And obviously, that has that the choice alone has a few different options as well as ramifications. And we will go into it in a bit just so we unpick it. But either way, we can see some examples of how this presents itself in real life. Lesson number 2, formatting of your messages. And this is the first time that you'll see a QR code with a blog post explaining all of this in details with some nice examples and bits of code you can look at yourself. Now, the first thing, which is really handy, is to use the native formatting options. Now, when you're looking into different nodes in Copilot Studio, you do have native formatting options. And what are these? Similar to what you see in the traditional Microsoft 365 products like Word and PowerPoint and so forth, is things like bolding and italics and bulleting in terms of organizing your data, even numbering. So these are native and it's super helpful because we are able to just very quickly format our messages accordingly. The next step, which I really, really like because it's such a handy thing to have, especially being familiar to it otherwise, is Power Effects. I think it's amazing that we have this opportunity within Copilot Studio. We are used to using Power Effects through other areas. Maybe it's your Canvas app, Live, or any other applications. So it's great that we're able to bring Power Effects expressions and format our messages accordingly. A neat little trick, for example, is when you're translating date types. For example, if you're moving from a US style to a European style version, or whether you're translating a date from an application that might be an ISO string like one to a more user friendly one. Things like that can come in really handy, or even transforming currency related numbers so that you can have the right format for it. That's pretty cool as well. And the documentation is very clear in terms of what expressions are available from the vast array of power effects within Copilot Studio, also mentioned in the QR code. So ultimately, you know exactly what you can use within Copilot Studio straight away, and it gives you some really good food for thought, actually. And the third thing is, which I think is a neat hack, if you want to let's say go down the Power Automate Cloudflow route, is to use, if you're using that automation separately, HTML as well. Now, this is a trick that I found was helping me when I was scouring through a lot of app data and having to organize it. So for example, I was connecting to my Dynamics 365 instance and I had to look through a lot of records and come up with a subset based on a specific query. But the way it was coming through was really disorganized, and I wanted it in a very specific kind of list format, with a specific kind of bulleting, specific kind of bolding. And I thought, yeah, sure, I could pass it on to the agent, and then I figure it out there. But actually, you could use HTML within the Cloudflow, and it will already give it to you in the message, very nicely done. So it's another route and it's very handy to bear in mind. Of course, that's a hack outside of Copilot Studio as well, right? Because you might be passing on that content elsewhere. So bear that in mind. Nice to have in your toolkit. Number 3 is, and it's one of my favorite topics, and we have some lovely other people in the community who talk about adaptive cards, is the use of such rich interactive content. Now for this one, I actually have a lot of different blog posts, but I just wanted to focus on this two. Feel free to go into my blog empoweredhumans.net if you want to look at the whole series of adaptive cards, as I've somehow gone down a very geeky rabbit hole with them. But I think in and out of Copilot Studio, they're a fantastic tool to have. So a bit of housekeeping. The QR code on the left is a starter, kind of a 101 blog post on everything you need to know about adaptive cards, but on a kind of level 100. And then the QR code slash blog post on the right, that's with regards to building a very specific kind of lengthy adaptive card slash automation process in terms of managing your tasks, which alludes to a Dynamics 365 kind of C experience as well, but not just that. So with the code behind it as well, the JSON that is. So feel free to delve into either or any others, and hopefully they help you. But back into the tips about adaptive cards. So the first thing that is super, super helpful to know is that Microsoft has provided a lovely designer. And yes, there is another geeky element there, the designer to rule them all. And what is that about? So this designer has a beautiful interactive surface where you can create in either a low code or pro code approach your adaptive card. So essentially, if I can visualize it for you, it has various areas. You can select your components and either drag and drop to create your card from top to bottom. So think of, okay, I want a title, and then I want an image, and then I want some text or some call to action buttons, things like that. So very low code where you can drag and drop your components and then configure the properties. And what happens in real time dynamically is that you also see your JSON editor populate as you drag and drop those components and configure them. And this is where the ProDev kind of area is. And the beauty of it is that whether you start low code by dragging and dropping components, or you remain within the Procode space and write your JSON, the other area updates. So ultimately, everything is updated in real time. You have your code if you want to import it anywhere else, because sometimes you want to reuse a template. And so it's super helpful to work in that designer until you get your final result. On top of that, it actually provides you previewing capabilities in various dimensions, which is super handy, not just in terms of course, previewing your work, but also thinking of how it will render on different devices. So for example, depending on the dimensions, you might want to think about how it will render on a mobile, classic use case, how it will render on a tablet, or a really big monitor of a desktop. So things like that are really helpful because you can natively do it within your designer. The next one, as I mentioned, is this balance between pro code and low code. So it's truly a fusion dev approach. And I think it's very accessible no matter where you come from and where you'd like to invest in, and ultimately a very portable solution. Of course, adaptive cards are not meant to just be these beautiful, rich, engaging experiences, but they work super well with automation. So whether you are coming from an automation background or this is something new, you can really invest in them. For example, they pair really well with, if we're just thinking about the world of Copilot Studio, with agent flows or even cloud flows, they pair really well with custom prompts. So a lot of different tools within Copilot Studio work very well with them, and they ultimately create much more engaging user experiences. So they're not just text-based. The next one is, since I did promise you we're going to do a little bit of a dive into agent flows, is to talk a bit about them and also go into a comparison with the traditional kind of Power Automate world. So what are they to begin with? So these are flows that are built directly in Microsoft Copilot Studio. It's part of the tools, and they are super optimized for agents. So they're built within the context of the agent straight away. You have the designer workspace, much like you would be used to if you were building the traditional cloud flows, and you're able to pick and choose different tools that you would for the agent as well. Now, whilst they are two different products, there is discrete investment on agent flows in terms of niche products that do not exist within cloud flows traditionally. So, for example, you may have seen a couple of new features, which are human in the loop and express mode. Now, what is that? So, human in the loop is your classic scenario where you want this native balance between having the agent do certain things autonomously, but also take a pause. And when it's time for a human to give some feedback, some input in a step, to actually take a step back, do that pause, and reach out to the human. So, for example, in the expense payment scenario that we were talking about earlier, submit a payment. The autonomous agent can go through a few steps and use the agent flow, but actually, there's going to be a moment where a manager, let's say in finance, has to approve your expense by reviewing the receipt and making sure it's within budget. And the receipt is a true, resemblance and whatnot, which is the final step before the approval takes place, regardless of the autonomous agent actions. So that's a good scenario of human in the loop. Another one is, which I think a few of us in the consulting work can really relate to, is the scenario of RFPs when you're working on bids and you need to request some information as part of that process for the bid itself. That's where human in the loop can also come in handy. So a few different scenarios, and I'm sure there's loads more out there, but this is actually built natively as part of Agent Flow. So pretty neat. Another one is express mode. Now, I don't know how many of you have looked into it, but I think that's a pretty neat feature for those of us that have battled with the time limit when it comes to traditional cloud flows timing out because something happened and they hit a roadblock and then the flow can't run. So express mode is actually, in a way, supercharging your agent flow to make sure that it doesn't hit that limit by being able to process that logic even faster and more efficiently. So definitely a feature to look out for. There are some caveats when it comes to express mode. So it's not a candidate for all kinds of kind of data and logic, because there's a separation between I have a lot of data and a very simple logic to run through, but it takes me a lot of time to go through that data versus I have small to moderate amount of data, but it's a really complex logic because both of them can hit a roadblock, but only one of them is a good candidate for express mode. So make sure you review your use case before you tag along express mode, but definitely a really cool feature. And the third one is, which is probably an obvious candidate, is that agent flows versus the traditional cloud flows have a different kind of licensing slash consumption model altogether. Yes, I use the licensing word. I'm sure I'm gonna get into joke jail somewhere. But the difference in that is that with Power Automate, for example, we are used to the traditional kind of premium license where you pay a standard amount each month, and it's a pretty small and decent amount. However, with agent flows, it's consumption based, so it has to do with Copilot credits. And so different licensing model and different ways to predict your cost and to manage your budget within a business, as well as manage your different solutions. So another thing to bear in mind. And of course, I think we knew this was coming. It's very important to remember that both tools exist. They come with different kind of opportunities as well as reasons. So let's have a quick comparison. So the first one is when it comes to agent flows, what is really cool about them is that they natively come with the context of the agent. So it's very easy to connect and pick apart. And of course, as we saw, not only is it generally AI optimized, but there's discrete investment on agent flows to have unique features that you wouldn't traditionally see in cloud flows. So as we mentioned, human in the loop and express mode, they're not the only ones, by the way, but just as an example. Now, that does not mean that if you really wanted to, you couldn't build in a traditional Cloudflow a human in the loop kind of setting. But let's be honest, speed of development makes a difference. and the skill set behind it and all that. So just because anything is possible doesn't mean it is desirable or reasonable to pursue. So always bear that in mind, that many ways or many roads lead to Rome, but what is the right one for each solution? The second one is, if we thought about traditional kind of Power Automate cloud flows, it is the OG, right? It is the way that we traditionally structured specific trigger-based scenarios that are either kind of event-driven, or let's say they're schedule-driven, whether it's a new row was added somewhere, let's trigger a flow, or I want to run a flow to produce a report at 10 a.m. every weekday. So this is the more traditional way of thinking about it, and it has for many, many years served their business processes. And when it comes to scenarios, as I mentioned before, a very reasonable argument is cost predictability. When it comes to having to compare a standard kind of license per month versus a consumption-based approach, this is going to be a conversation that we're going to be having, not just in this case, but also many other products, because of how different features are shaped. So it's a worthwhile conversation to have, especially for those people that are, let's say, more in the pre-sale space and specialize in it. Something to consider, but so many cool features to review regardless. The next one is, and remember, this is part of the key things that I asked us to spotlight within Ali Miller's kind of prediction board, and this is context. So when we are looking at agents, oh, and of course, here's the blog post for you, which will explain everything that we're going to cover in detail. When we are talking to an agent, let's think selfishly for a moment, right? Let's take ourselves in the equation and think about how annoying it is when there's so many data points about us, and yet the company/agent doesn't seem to understand us. Very simple scenario. You are, and I'm sure you're to some extent experiencing this within the services that you're part of. You're logged in into a company account of whatever sort, not your own work company. I'm referring to, let's say, um, a retailer or a hospitality company, whatever that may be, that you have an account with. They have data about you, whether it is your full name, your address, whether it is your previous purchase history, so much rich data, right? And yet, even though you've logged in, so you've clearly gone through authentication, the agent will ask you the same things again, or the agent may ignore the fact that you're on a specific page or purchase a specific product already. And even though you should be able to feel seen and understood by the agent, it seems like it's completely agnostic. So when it comes to passing context, you are actually not only enhancing user experience, you are actively looking at amplifying your companies or your services retention, your brand loyalty, because you're creating much superior experiences. So the first data point is anything to do with the user that we already know. For example, if they're logged in, we have so much rich data about themselves as part of their account and so forth. And sometimes it's not about who they are generally as a person slash kind of, let's say, maybe employee, if we're talking about a workplace scenario, but also what the context is at the specific point of time. An example is what website they're in, or maybe what Power Pages site they're in, because of course we want to integrate some of our products even more. So you can create context based on that. And in that sense, you essentially are creating variables that are sticky enough to pass the context from the user circumstances, whether it's their general background profile or their circumstances at the time, let's say what pages they've clicked on, what products and what not, to make this more enhanced context-driven agent experience. And the next step you can take, now that you've created this context and the agent is much more knowledgeable on the specific user, is to say, okay, so based on that, I'm going to customize my knowledge sources. And this is just an example of an action, by the way, to only give you specific answers. A very simple example is, actually, I'll give you two. The first one is, let's say you're browsing a very specific sub website of a known restaurant chain. So you're in a specific branch. Let's say I'm in the branch of my area. They offer a different menu to a more central branch, let's say in central London. So, and I'm inquiring about the menu. So I can tell the agent based on this variable that shows the area that the user is based in or the website that the user is browsing, only inquire for that specific branch menu, which means that I'm going to get much more specific answers. If I'm asking, for example, is there a vegan friendly menu that the branches offer or do not offer on a separate basis? So we're making it a lot more specific, and it's much more useful when it comes to the efficiency of the conversation, but also really making users understood. Another example would be for example's purposes in a hospitality chain, if you are looking at different hotel branches, let's say the same brand, but let's say it's a location between London and Paris, and they offer different amenities. Let's say, for example, do they have a pool? Who's they? You as a user has not specified, but the agent understood that you're inquiring about the Paris location. And yes, they do have a pool. So you're not going to get confused as a user in terms of the answer. And the agent is not going to have to either give you an extra question, which branch are you referring to, or maybe give you the wrong answer in a hallucination because there's just too much knowledge to look at. So you're increasing the efficiency and the user experience overall. The next step is, and I'm sure in some shape or form, you've heard of MCP servers and the world of MCP. So let's dive into it. First of all, what does it stand for? It stands for Model Context Protocol. It's something that came out of Anthropic. It's a standard open source protocol for AI agents to essentially communicate with different data, tools, resources, and whatnot in a holistic way. So instead of saying that you're building a traditional kind of connector, the library of connectors that we know and love of 1500 plus for a very specific kind of part of an application or a process, you are exploring the whole tool as a whole. And what is that tool? It may be Dynamics 365. It may be Dataverse. It may be your, SAP application. It could be anything really, but you're looking at it as a whole. That means that you are using the whole context of the app, not just its data, but how the data is defined in the data model, how the different processes come into play when it comes to, let's say, different business logic and custom flows and, workflows and whatnot. So it looks at it very holistically. And that means that obviously you're grounding your data in a much more efficient way, and you're interacting and you're helping the user interact with a lot more meaning and gravitas. Now, traditionally, MCPs are pro dev. So this is something that needs to be built in a pro dev context because you're building all of this knowledge around it. And again, thinking about how they're traditionally built as a custom tool, you're also responsible, assuming you're building your own server, you're responsible for hosting, securing, and operating. So think, for example, ALM and whatnot. Now that, if you're thinking of it in a custom way, comes with its territory. Of course, you have all this independence and agency over it, but that comes also at certain considerations of speed and cost, of course, right? But of course, Microsoft has been nice enough to give us some built-in MCP servers in their ecosystem. So that already accelerates our journey by being able to use them by default. Of course, there's some configuration for them, but it's very different to saying I'm going to build mine from scratch. Right. So just like we did earlier by comparing traditional Power Automate cloud flows and agent flows, it's inevitable we have to compare MCP servers and connectors. But it's not a single comparison. I'd love for us to think about it as a decision tree. And what I mean by that is that it's not a binary choice. Am I going to use an MCP server or a connector? There's actually a bigger kind of dilemma here, which is going built in, for example, because we have some existing MCP servers and connectors, or custom. So that's our first choice. Should we go with a built-in MCP server or a built-in connector? We know we have like 1,500 plus connectors, but we also have some, obviously not as many because it's a very new kind of kid in the block, built-in MCP servers. So how do we go about it? And before I go into the details of how to approach this answer, I want to give you some food for thought with a question. When you make such choices, you have to kind of consider who is building versus consuming this. So the reason being is that there's certain responsibilities as well as opportunities, or let's say challenges, when you are building your own MCP server and thus going custom versus just consuming it, aka you're going built in. So you have to understand for your solution and your business what's the right thing to do. For example, when you're going built in, whichever path in MCP or connector, then with the MCP, every time that there's updates to the tools themselves, the MCP auto discovers them so that you don't have to go through that pain, which is great, right? Because depending on your business processes and how often these things change, that might be quite a manual labor overload. However, if you go down the down the connector path, built-in connectors means that there's an opportunity to customize as you're building it, the tool descriptions, which is quite important, as well as the input values. Because, and what I mean by tool description is the way you describe each process, each tool can make a difference. We know this by building agents general. Descriptions do matter. Titles and descriptions matter. The way you're inputting your variables, the way you understand the inputs to the tool also matter. So with connectors, you do have agency over that, even when they are those available in the built-in library. Whilst with MCP, you don't. You are consuming. Hence the question: who builds versus consume, as they are. And another kind of area to bear in mind that might sway your decision either or is that there are, let's say, with MCP servers, by default, you're bunching a lot of tools into one, which is great, but you're looking at it at a macro level. Those connectors, albeit the manual kind of setup that they require, they give you a per tool micro view as well. So for example, you can set up per tool your DLP policies, your ACP policies, and really do that micro level ALM, which you can't do the same way with MCP servers. So there's some decisions there depending on the governance of your business and the risk kind of profile you have, the agency and the independence that you want over the way you're absorbing the tools, or versus saying you want this holistic kind of autonomous almost and not a discoverable solution. So a few ways to think about that comparison. The next dilemma is going custom. So this is where we are thinking about, will we build our own MCP server versus will we build our own connector from scratch and ignoring the existing library? And for that, let me give you another food for thought question. You need to think about what is it that you're trying to achieve? What do you need as part of your solution? And does it exist already? I know this sounds obvious, but sometimes it's about doing that kind of discovery work as well, making sure that you're not reinventing the wheel, and that potentially something already exists out there. Maybe a colleague has built it somewhere around the business. It may exist. even if it's not offered by default through the Microsoft library. So with that in mind, the first question that you truly need to ask yourself as you're making this choice is, am I going to have to reuse this bit of work across different platforms or different agent integrations? Because that is important, right? With MCP servers, they're reusable, but with connectors, you have to set it up again and again. Complexity, that can also add to it. With connectors, and I know this is going to sound like a blanket statement, so please take it with a pinch of salt because I'm just trying to explain a point. With connectors, based on personal experience at least, I feel like this is something that you can push in terms of complexity from short to medium complexity. And there's a bit of a cliff between going from medium to super complex logic where it makes you think, I think this should be an MCP server instead because it's becoming so complex. And again, nothing is technically impossible, but you also have to consider the skill set that is needed to build something as well as what's available in your team. So another reason why you might be swayed towards the MCP or the connector dilemma. And finally, you may have guessed this already, but it's ALM as well, because as we said, MCP servers are great for that macro view. So many different tools and processes are coming together. They have access to different resources. It's wonderful, but it gives you that that macro level as a consumer. And that applies to ALM as well. So if you want to have a per tool ALM or ACP approach, then unfortunately, you can't do that with MCP servers. You have to work with a connector that can give you a per tool kind of ALM view. And thus, once again, depending on what your preference for your governance approach and your general risk profile in the business, you have a choice to make there, right? There's always a trade-off. However, not all of it is different. There is common ground between the two, or as I like to call it, they're children of the same tech gods. Different children, right? They're not twins in any way, but they are siblings. So the first thing is how they handle tokens. So if you think about authentication, DLP, and ACP policies, they actually, in principle, handle tokens very similarly. The second thing is reporting. So they both can use telemetry with application insights, which is wonderful, right? Because we need this visibility. And for those that do work with VNet integration and of course love generative orchestration, these are two bits that work across the board as well. So that's not necessarily a differentiator because you can take advantage of it regardless. So as you can see, this is the common ground that you can have. And ultimately, even though you have different choices to make, what I would like for you to take from this session/slides is that you are able to, instead of make a direct choice, to be a bit more investigative and think about all these different kind of questions with your colleagues and your business and say, instead of making a direct choice, let's investigate a little bit. Let's look at the different areas that we want to invest in, whether it's, the team skills, the speed to development and market, the risk profile that we're going to invest our ALM in, and so forth. So there's all these different kind of opportunities to have a discussion with your business and really invest in something that not just short term, but medium and long term makes sense for you, because it's a journey. All of this is a development journey and an investment for your processes and your people. Now, I did promise you 10 things, but what can I say? A bonus is always fun. So another thing that I wanted to share with you is the importance of choosing the channel for your agent. So a couple of blog posts there in terms of an application-led approach, whether you are integrating, let's say, with your business application. It might be a Dynamics 365 instance. It might be a Power Up of any sort. So that's the QR code on the left, and different ways to do it, including one of my favorite hacks, which is looking into adding it into the side pane and using the client API to be able to have that contextual prose. Remember, context is a theme, so very, very important, where you, as you navigate your application, you maintain that sidecar experience, much like we love with the traditional kind of Microsoft 365 Copilot chat, and be able to maintain that context as you're navigating the application. The other one is how to do it if you have your own Power Pages site, and some do's and don'ts, or some best practices. So that's the second blog post on the right, because as we build our own websites, it's important that we are not only creating those agentic experiences that are infused natively, but also giving the opportunity to have that memory, have that context, and giving the user the best UX and UI possible. But of course, let's not forget that we have the opportunity of multiple other channels. So for example, if you are in the customer service slash contact center place, you're able to connect with those applications. And in fact, it's not just about the dynamics of the world, but you might be, let's say, Zendesk or ServiceNow or Salesforce and so forth. And these are also direct native integrations that you can do within Copilot Studio. Or it might be also in the customer service space that you might want to integrate with telephony and have your own kind of IVR agent, another option. Or maybe you have WhatsApp for business. So different ways to think about it, and different ways to use those channels to make the most out of your solution, and to really find their users in their flow of work and their general kind of activities. So I wanted to make sure that we are not rushing, and you're not just rushing into your next session, but also have the opportunity to ask questions. So Tanya, I'd love to take questions if anyone wants to have a chat and give people the opportunity to be a bit more interactive. So I'll
That
go
would be
off screen.
great. Do people have
Yeah.
questions? It's pretty quiet in the chat. And also in the Q&A section. Yeah, first of all, give Angeliki an applause. That would be great. Thank you so
Appreciate it.
much. That was a great session, and thanks for sharing all your experience you have and all the knowledge you gained within your projects. I learned a lot, actually, to be honest over here. Wonderful session. So this is just feedback. Are there questions?
Please feel free. And it might not be a question, it might be just something that sparked a thought. Maybe you want to share your own experiences, or you had anything else in mind.
Could also be some general stuff about Copilot Studio and agent creation, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You now have an expert to talk to. You know what I really like? People are using the interpreter agent in this meeting.
I
It's
did
not
see that,
not about
yeah.
that topic, but I'm just seeing it all the time that people are interpreting here. Looking forward regarding reading your blog posts. That's great. That's great.
Oh, that's
Angeliki,
very
can you
kind.
share the links to your blog post, maybe also directly within the chat?
Yeah, I'm gonna do that right now because I think that's a good kind of investment of time. So,
Yeah.
the link that I just put in, that's the general link for the blog. But let me put a specific playlist when it comes to all things Copilot Studio, because I think that really applies to today's conversation. Well, glad whoever posted about enjoying the knowledge on MCP servers. Uh, Please, thank you so much for your kind comment, and I'm really glad you enjoyed it. I think it's a little bit of a rabbit hole because it's not a straightforward answer of what to choose. It's more of an explorative session, but hopefully you enjoyed the different ways to think about it and ask your business what is the right approach in total.
Mm.
So let me give you the Copilot Studio playlist.
Maybe I have a question, Angeliki, in the
Go
meantime.
for
What
it.
are most the most common scenarios when creating agents? Is it more retrieval agents, so intelligent assistants, or would you say we are going into the direction also of autonomous agents?
Yeah, I mean, retrieval was the first scenario. I don't think it will ever go away, but I do believe that we, as a society of consumers as well as builders, are becoming more demanding of that. And I think it's important that we push the boundaries for what we're creating in the tech. So the autonomous for sure, but based on what I see as the biggest value is general kind of native automation of business processes that traditionally take a lot of time. Now, I know that sounds very kind of general and blasé, but I'll give you an example. How we operate as teams, whether it's in the consulting world or the end user world, there's still so many manual processes that take time. And I love that Microsoft, for example, is investing in things like human in the loop, that is basically saying, to the agent, do everything autonomously, but the few touch points where you need a human.
Mm.
So investing in processes like that, where yeah, there is autonomy, but also there is still some humans involved, some key decisions. So for example, you wouldn't let an agent sign a customer contract, right, without looking at it. So, but that's the maybe the semi-final stage or the final stage, rather than going through all the groundwork of working on an RFP, putting together, a proposal, things like that. I'd love to see us giving ourselves more opportunities to be creative with what we build and making a difference for our teammates, our businesses, because there's nothing better than making something that is truly making a difference and knowing that you've built a legacy out of it. You've built something that will exist after you leave the team and after you leave the company. So yeah, that's how I see it. What will make a difference even after you leave that team and company?
That sounds interesting.
Right.
Leaving a
Somehow,
legacy sounds great.
yes. Now, somehow, I think we've inspired a few people to ask questions, so maybe we can have a look at the chat.
Yes.
Um,
There was another question. There seems to be notion that MCP is anyway the way forward in the mid or long run. How do you see that?
Um, it's a very blanket statement. A, I can't predict the future. B, I don't necessarily agree that it will replace everything. Just like, and ask me in a different session, what are my thoughts about agent flows versus cloud flows? Brief statement. I don't think cloud flows as in part automate will ever go away for many, many reasons. But ask me about that debate another time. So similarly, I don't think connectors will ever go away. I don't think that MCP servers are the only way. I'll give you an example. If your company has they're very risk averse and they need a per tool ALM and you can't do with MCP, what are you going to say? Well, I don't care about your governance appetite. I'll still do it anyway because it's much easier to do other things otherwise. Right? That alone is an argument for not being able to implement MCP servers all the time. Also, the other thing that I would consider is if you have a very simple solution, why would you need to use an MCP server? Just because an MCP server sounds like this amazing, you know, super powerful tool, if it's a simple solution, why would you need to choose it? So I wouldn't say it's necessarily the way forward for everything, but it's definitely a very nice thing to have for those um, complex solutions or just kind of like supercharged business solutions that really need something more powerful to go with it.
Mhm. There is another interesting question over here. Is Copilot Studio a good option for developing autonomous agents, or would Microsoft Foundry be a better choice? It's
Right.
nearly.
Again, not necessarily something that we can say do this or the other. It's the same as saying, indulge me here for a moment. It's like saying, are we going to forget low code and be pro code in the future? Are we going to forget about per platform and just work on Foundry? Are we going to ignore business applications and just look at pro developers and Azure developers? And I don't think this will go away. because on top of the fact that the fusion world, as in the existence of pro developers and low code makers, is a really nice world to live in. It's very inclusive. Everyone gets to be part of the conversation and the solutions, and gives us the opportunity to empower more people. Practically speaking, working within the low code world, including but not limited to Copilot Studio, is the opportunity to not have to worry. Let's take the MCP server example about hosting, securing, and operating your own solutions, right? This is a very known fact, as well as speed to development and market. That's the beauty of low-code solutions like Copilot Studio. So yes, there is a lot more so there's a lot more complexity you can build, but what about the fact that you need product skills that not every team has, or maybe you need more time to develop? And let's be honest, sometimes they're time critical solutions you need to develop, and they can't wait for the few like weeks that maybe a foundry solution needs to go through the end-to-end delivery life cycle. So we need to be realistic that the really cool things are not necessarily things that a business can always, or the really complex things might not make sense for a specific business scenario.
Perfect. Thank you for the answer to that. Another question, will you share the slide deck?
I mean, I think there will be recordings, right? So you can see
There
the
will be
slides there.
recordings,
There you
yes.
go.
And I think we just have 2 minutes left. Let's just hand over, or take the 2 minutes to hand over to the next question, not to the next question, to the next session. But
Sure.
I'm sure if you have more questions, you are able to reach out to Angeliki on LinkedIn.
Perfect,
Follow her on
right?
LinkedIn, reach out to
There you go.
her.
There you go.
That's what the
Here's the
community
QR
is for.
codes.
Yeah, connected
Please.
with each other.
Thank you so much again for today. You've all been so lovely. Thank you for sharing your questions. Thank you for hosting me today. I'd love to see you at some other time. So please stay connected and have a lovely rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Angeliki, for your session, for your insights, and for being part of CoCoCo. Have a nice
Thank
day.
you so much. Take care. Bye, everyone.